Health data research is changing fast. New standards, new infrastructure, and new AI capabilities are reshaping what researchers can do, but also what institutions need to put in place to support them responsibly. Trusted Research Conversations is a podcast from Aridhia for the people navigating this change. I'm Ross Stiven, your host, the Senior Product Manager here at Aridhia, and in each episode, I'll be speaking to guests from across the research, clinical and technology communities, discussing the practical realities of secure data research, federated analysis, AI governance, and the standards and regulations that underpin it all. And today we are joined by Tim Machin of University College London and Dr. Christian Cole of the University of Dundee. And they're here to speak to us about the SATRE specification, which they've developed as part of a DARE UK project. So, Chris, Tim, thank you for joining us today. Very happy to have you here to talk about SATRE. Generally speaking, we start with the guests just giving us a bit about their background. So just kind of explaining who they are, what their interests are. And then we'll move on to the topic today. So I don't know who wants to go first, but if you could both just introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure, I can go first. Hi, thanks, Ross. I'm Chris Cole. I'm an academic reader in health informatics at the medical school at the University of Dundee. I'm also the academic director for the Health Informatics Centre, also hosted here at the University of Dundee, and we are one of the regional safe havens, as they're called, here in Scotland. And so we manage and provide secure access to NHS data for researchers to use for clinically related research. And I guess in the context of this podcast and this chat is I was, and I guess still am, the PI or the principal investigator for the SATRE project, which started in 2023.
Thanks for bringing us on here, Ross. So my name's Tim Machin. I'm an enterprise architect working at UCL. And as part of that job, I've worked on UCL's previous trusted research environment and our new trusted research environment that we've built in the last year or so, particularly around design and also a lot around the governance and so on. We've unlike Chris's area, we don't run. We're not part of the NHS SDU network. We're an academic provider, largely for UCL projects, but it's quite large scale. Lots and lots of small ones, and some very large cohort studies that host and share data. I started working with Chris on SATRE in 2023, really around the design of the overall structure of the thing, and then helping to pull together input from the community.
Great, thank you very much, both. So obviously SATRE is what we're here to talk about. So I guess there's maybe a couple of things we should clear up. First of all, what does SATRE stand for? What does the acronym stand for?
It's a little bit not funny, but it's the standard architecture for trusted research environment. But I often misstate it and call it the standardized architecture for trusted research environments. But it's a framework, and it's a specification for defining which capabilities TREs should have or can have, and then TREs or organizations with a TRE or those that want to create a TRE can then look at what is required and assess themselves against that to see where they line up. Because the landscape before, when we started this, was actually there wasn't any clear definition of what a TRE is, certainly not in the UK. And especially at that time was around when the NHS started building their network of secure environments called the secure data environments. And so they generated new terminology. And so that kind of didn't help the situation either. We had a mixed economy of implementations, and also a mixed economy of nomenclature. So SATRE was there to try and help bridge that gap, and then to bring things together. And I think that's what we achieved by the end of the 9-month project that we ran.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know, Tim, if you've got anything you'd like to.
Yeah, I
suppose
I could probably talk a little bit about the structure in terms of like that kind of project initiation. I think there was a great desire. It happened slightly before I got involved. There was a great desire to have it sort of community driven. So it's not really us writing a thing that people can consume, but more gathering. So as Chris rightly says, right, there's lots of these things happening. It's just nobody was really talking to each other about what you were supposed to do correctly. So it was more like, how do we reach some sort of consensus, and then how do we publish something? And I think the challenge was always kind of understanding what level to set that at. Because if you reach out to the community, you get very, very precise, fine detail, and then it should be secure, right? So we I think when I got involved, that was very much like, how do we bring a structure into this so that it's specific enough to be useful, but generalized enough to be useful broadly. So that's kind of how we structured it.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. So I think perhaps now it may be worth talking about what's in that structure. So obviously you have I want to say they're called the 4 pillars. I don't know if I'm using the correct terminology there, but so it may be worth talking about what those are and what kind of things that those individual pillars cover. If that's okay.
Sure. So the pillars themselves are a capability. So like, again, the challenge of how to construct it rather than it just being a list without form was to sort of say, what are the things that need to exist within an organization in order to do this thing safely? So there was 4 core capabilities, sort of pillar capabilities for the original version 1, which was information governance, computing technology, which includes information security, data management, and then a bunch of supporting capabilities, which, if you can imagine, they're the sort of things that usually exist within an organization anyway, like financial management and maybe project management. And we didn't really model those out so thoroughly because, people will do their own thing. We're not going to tell you how to run, finance in your organization. So InfoGov is what it sounds like. It's really around risk. A lot of quality management stuff is in there, so those capabilities fit underneath it. Computing technology is really, a bit of the infrastructure and how you manage the information security. So that would be all CSI, right? So confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Data management, where we get into kind of how you, in that sort of safe data, in the 5 safe space, and safe outputs. And there's a reasonable split. The largest one is computing technology, and in those there's a bunch of statements. So in each one of those pillars, we have a bunch of statements that that the community feels are really important, and we provide and there's a key for like the importance of each statement. And then underneath that, it's underpinned by some architecture. So think about the critical processes that are required within that capability. Think about the kind of the roles that are available, that are in there, and some of the applications. But that's kind of where we drew a line. It's mostly the business architecture, that's represented in the architecture. Yeah.
That's an interesting distinction. I think obviously we've adopted SATRE, and we're quite keen on it. But why did you decide that it should be about those sort of business processes and things like that rather than specific technologies?
I think when we were talking, so we worked a lot with the Alan Turing Institute, and there was people working on there, and I think that the approach did change somewhat, because I think there was this idea that we could write something down that would be a generalizable technical pattern or something. And I think that's where the project originally went. And I think when we started talking to the community about what they wanted included, it was so clear that there was like risk management and information governance and data management. So yeah, and I think that that's probably and the strengths and weaknesses of that. I think we've always wanted to maybe push down a little bit further and say actually these are kind of SATRE patterns. So this is what a normal infrastructure would look like that you could adopt. And the DARE program that I'm sure we'll talk about later has kind of pushed into a bit of that space. But yeah, it was quite clear that people were mostly looking at risk, assurance, and those kind of things, because Chris can talk a bit about this, but particularly like equivalence became a key thing. So how do you look at somebody else's organization and know that it's safe? And most of that isn't about the tech, right? It's about who does what. Is there someone responsible? Have people thought this through properly? Is it documented? Do you have data to support that kind of safety? So yeah, that's kind of where it came from.
Okay, no, that's interesting. I don't know, Chris, if there's anything you want to come in on that.
So yeah, what Tim was said was absolutely correct. In that this was very much a community-driven project right from the start, and even including the public. So we had a public member as part of the grant writing team. So when the proposal was written, we had public members involved as well as technical members. And I guess I'd like to acknowledge our collaborators in this project. So there was Dundee and UCL involved, but the Ellen Turing Institute were very heavily involved. Ulster University and Research Data Scotland, was the core team that developed SATRE in the first place. So and what was really interesting was, yes, the community really changed the direction of what we thought we were going to do from day one. We thought we were going to do, like you were asking Ross about, why isn't this a technical description of what a TRE is? Because that's where we went down the road, as what tooling do you use? What packages do you allow? Those sorts of things. And the response came back in bucket loads was, yeah, this isn't really interesting. We can, TREs can solve those questions. It's more, we need help in understanding what is the landscape we need to worry about in terms of explaining to our stakeholders of what we do, and how we manage and can address the risk and the questions around risk that primarily data controllers have and universities have around managing sensitive data, because everyone is concerned around that, and more and more so as we go along in terms of digitizing of everything. So that's why we kind of pivoted pretty rapidly to looking at kind of higher level things, which actually has been a great thing, because it means it's much more adoptable by a broader community. And so I think that's part of the reason why it's been pretty well adopted across the board in different domains and by different organizations. And I guess final point to add is around the public. We ran some early workshops with the public right at the beginning as well, and one of the key things for them was around transparency and being able to, when you explain things to them about the work that you do, and this is common through lots of projects that we've done now through DARE, is that once you explain it, it's really clear, and the advantages and the benefits are really clear, and the public are on board. But it's the fact that you need to explain it to them in a group session. Where's the transparency? Where's the understanding that they can go and individuals can go and find to understand it in their own time? So that's why we did everything completely openly and transparently right from the start.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, the fact that it seems to be more about principles rather than specific technologies, it does make it much more adaptable and dare I say durable, because obviously the technologies the particular software packages that people use to do their analysis will change, but the risks will always be there, right? And obviously they'll evolve as well, but they won't evolve in quite the same way and at a slower pace, So I mean, you were talking about adoption there. So what sort of adoption have you seen? Like who has adopted and provided a SATRE score?
So I guess, yeah, you mentioned the score, so maybe I'll explain the score a little bit. So we have 3 categories of criteria. So of the capabilities are broken down into 160 statements, and they are categorized as optional, recommended, and mandatory. 75 thereabouts, that might change, I think, are considered mandatory. So in some ways you can say that is the definition of a TRE in the UK. If you comply with those 75 statements, then you are running a TRE, and have similar capabilities as other TREs that meet those requirements. And so what we did was to try and simplify the self-evaluation as much as possible by a 0 to 2 score. So a 0 is you don't do this at all. A 1 is yes, we do it, but probably could do better. We may not be meeting best practice or whatever, but it is something that we do as an organization, as a TRE. And then 2 is where you're meeting best practice. You probably have an accreditation that addresses that particular thing, and you can evidence it that way. And that's how that scoring mechanism works. And it's not perfect. There are criticisms of it. It's a little bit vague, the difference between a 1 and a 2, but broadly speaking, I think it really does meet the needs. I think we've thought about changing it, and then it just ends up being really complicated, and then that kind of increases the bar to actually trying to use it.
I mean, I will say from our experience of using the SATRE scoring, I mean, perhaps we were getting this completely wrong, but our interpretation of it was 0 is you don't do it, 1 is you somewhat do it, and 2 is you either meet or exceed that standard. So I from our experience, I think we found it as clear as these things can be. I mean, obviously there's always going to be a degree of ambiguity, right? But my personal reflection on that would be that we actually found the scoring system to be quite easy to understand. Yeah.
And just, I guess to answer your actual question was like, who's adopted it?
Yes.
I mean, it's really been quite something at how readily it's been adopted. And I think this harks back to this being a community-driven activity. We had over 60 organizations involved in the SATRE project originally, through input or attending collaboration cafes that we ran, online events that we ran every 2 weeks over 7 or 8 months. And so this community-driven aspect meant it was already visible to a large swathe of the community, and also they were involved in it. So there was already some ownership of that, and it's really great to see industry partners like Aridhia adopting it so readily. Universities absolutely were there right to the front, and of course through the university contacts here in Scotland, we're part of the Scottish Safe Haven network, and with that network we did a peer-to-peer self-evaluation where SATRE was extremely helpful for that. And the NHS SD network have adopted it through individual SDEs, but I've recently found out that actually now is going to be a requirement that all SDEs meet the mandatory requirements of SATRE. And I think that shows that there's broad adoption around different areas, in terms of academia, in terms of industry, in terms of large-scale national infrastructure, are seeing the benefits of SATRE and the gap it fills. And we've also been working through a European consortium I'm in, so there's European partners that are adopting it or at least evaluating themselves against it. It's quite interesting. The model for what they call secure processing environments in the EU particularly is somewhat different. So some of the mandatories that we would call mandatory in the UK are not in Europe. So that's quite an interesting nuance that we need to think about going forward. And that's in organizations that are mature TREs. We're also working with government organizations in Latin and South America who are kind of relatively new in this space and are looking for guidance and help, and they're using SATRE to help them design systems to do population level research and with secure data.
That's really interesting. And actually, I thought it was much more of a UK specific thing. So it's really good to hear that it's being adopted outside the UK.
It was designed and built for the UK market, but doing research on sensitive data is a global phenomenon, and is not, the risks are the same, really, across the board. We want to keep the data secure. We need to manage people's privacy, but likewise, there's a ton of information, useful information for research and for government understanding that can be tapped into.
No, it's really encouraging, and like I say, we're quite big supporters of SATRE, so I think the more people adopt it, the better, personally. What we should maybe talk about now is something that I didn't totally understand, is the relationship of the project to DARE UK. So how do SATRE work with DARE UK? What is the relationship there?
So initially, SATRE was a project funded directly by DARE for a 9-month project, in January to September, October 2021. But along with some of the other projects that were funded in that same round, DARE then developed into phase 2. So the original round of funding was phase 1. And so this phase 2 is built around a transformational program of work, which started last March. And that was billed under the Trevolution program, or Trevolution, it depends. There's different pronunciations of these things. But yeah, the Trevolution program has then brought in a much broader projects, including SATRE. SATRE is kind of the baseline specification and common standard across the programs, to look at federation, secure data management around disclosure control of traditional data as well as machine learning models, and so through this phase 2 program, the PIs of these programs have worked very closely with DARE to help deliver a package of work that is both competitive, and also we can work closely together to build out a common set of tools and requirements that benefit the UK TRE community, and so aid the transformation of where we were 3-4 years ago to where we want to be going forward. And so DARE are definitely a funder, but they also a partner within the project. They're both they're equally invested in the good outcomes of what we're doing here, and so SATRE is a key part of that.
Tim, I don't know if there's anything you would add to that.
When we talk about I guess maybe the one change is that when we ran the project the first time, it was quite we didn't really work that much with DARE because it was kind of a smaller deal and the projects were quite separate. In the development of the next version, because it's a larger group, it's a broader set of people working on the Treevolution program. Actually, it's been a really key community for driving it, and it, they've given us the majority of the input on the things that we're going to put in the next version.
That's really interesting. So I think that leads us on quite nicely to our final topic, which is the how you see SATRE evolving. So I'm aware that there's a project for SATRE 2.0, but that's about as much as I know at this point. So it'd be interesting to see how you think it's going to evolve over the next sort of 12, 18 months.
So, yeah, thank you. Today's really timely time to be asking that question, because, version 2 is a key milestone and output for SATRE during the Treevolution program. And we are in the process of doing an internal review of the new standard or the new specification. And the key novelty and the key addition is a new pillar about federation. So this is where the SATRE specification initially was around you're an organization and you want to make something that is fit for purpose for doing safe research in the UK. Now we're expanding that to where the demands are, where you want to bring data together from more than one organization, whether it's the same data, but you want more of it. So say you're looking at cardiovascular disease and you want to do it across multiple organizations that have health data, or you want to do a multi-factorial data set. So you want to looking at health and education and other things like that. And so version 2 is kind of an add-on. It's not, so you can be version 1 compliant or version 2 compliant. They are kind of coexisting, certainly for now. But I'll let Tim go into more of the details of that pillar itself, because he's led on that aspect of it.
Sure, thanks, Chris. So, as Chris says, the federation pillar, again, it's been really generated from the community that are thinking quite deeply about these issues, and I guess broadly the community is quite diverse. It's obviously tends to be health leaning, but not exclusively so. But we wanted to have things that were not just how do you connect two NHS STs together. So it is broadly, it is much more broadly applicable. And the way to perhaps think about the difference in the statements that are in the federation pillar, it would be like a group of organisations need to agree this, or and a good example is if you've got a piece of complexity that we'd want to unpick under SATRE, and we have statements around it, would be you've probably got different data classifications in different organizations. So how do you think about equivalence, particularly when you're talking about taking outputs, right? And it might be that these, and again, perhaps in a network of SDEs, NHS SDEs, that's relatively simple because at least they've got the same data classification and probably have some of the same rules. But if you bring in different branches of government or data that's been generated by a university and NHS data or education data, it becomes much more complex. We've tried to build those things in, and broadly there are extensions for things that already exist. So there's kind of extensions to information governance. How do you manage risk across multiple organizations, and computing technology and security? How do you make sure that network traffic is secured across the public internet, because that's probably something that you may not have been doing before. So that's where we've got to. There's around, well, we haven't fixed on it yet, but there's sort of 20 odd statements. I think it's going to be interesting when because we've had a couple of rounds of gathering the data in quite open forums together, and we've kind of, what you find is that you end up with, okay, we've got like 150 contributions, and trying to deduplicate those and then play them back. I'm sure that we'll get some people that sort of ask, where's my bit? But we want to boil it down to something that's not going to make the whole thing twice as long, and you just repeat the same statement saying, if you're a federation, do this. do the thing that you're already doing in SATRE.
Cool.
I think the other bit in 2.0 is like a review, because we ran the last project quite quickly, and it's fair to say that there are some bits that can be tweaked and moved around. I think one of the things that we wanted to include off the back of input from the public was around statements around public benefit, and also probably to move the public engagement bit from it wasn't supporting, which I think is probably always in the wrong place. Move that a bit higher up the specification into information governance, because I think that the community feels that they want, the public and broadly the TRE community would like to feel like the public is involved actively in how their data is governed, and so it's probably the right place for it to be. So there's a few structural changes like that, and yeah, so I think that it's going to be a little bit longer, but not too bad, and some of the oversights have been corrected in the new version.
The other thing that we're looking at is what does the future landscape look like? So we also run a community interest group around SATRE, which is looking more long term around what is the role of SATRE. Okay, we've got this specification.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a standard? Is it an accreditation? What does that look like? And we had some sessions around this at the UK TRE community meeting last year, which I think you were at, and there was a real interest and desire to have a UK-wide accreditation for TREs, and SATRE could be that. But then we need a framework around that. Who does the auditing? Who looks after the standard? And then it came down to, oh well, then it costs money to get audited, right? So who does that? And oh well, maybe we're not so keen on having a formal audited standard, because a lot of organizations have ISO 27001 accreditation, but that's expensive and it's kind of time consuming to do. So there's a real tension there about how do we go further? Because SATRE has been great, but because it's self-evaluating, the robustness of it could be better. So we're looking at how can we do that, and we're in negotiations with the UK Stats Authority, because they do the audit for the Digital Economy Act accreditation. So I think there's an opportunity there for doing some work in there, and I think I know there is work going on in this space, and I think there is going to be a change in this landscape going forward.
That's interesting.
Probably worth mentioning one of the things that just come to mind as Chris was talking. So the other work that Dundee have done is to create a kind of mapping across standards. So this is quite a complex space, right? And lots of people already have ISO.
Yep.
You can fairly easily, although I'm going to say that it's not the person that did the work, map the SATRE statements to the ISO standards, like the sections of the standard and in the SOA.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's helpful because it's kind of a shortcut for how you would do the evaluation. If you've already got ISO, then you can look at this cross-reference and you can start to work out which statements in our standard cover the statements in SATRE. And I think that's been really good. I mean, the one differentiator for SATRE from something like the DEA or ISO is that you can have ISO 27001 and be a cake shop or AWS. So it's sort of helpful, but not really. It doesn't give you anywhere enough of the detail to differentiate the thing that you're doing from someone else. Mm-hmm. And that's really so. If you can use SATRE as either to build out your ISO, or you can use ISO as a key for looking up how you would meet SATRE, and that work's been quite valuable, I think.
Mm. Yes, there are a lot of standards out there, and I can vouch for the fact that it is extremely time consuming to keep up with them. I think we spend something like 2,000 hours a year on ISO alone. And again, this is just from the perspective of someone who has really just consumed it rather than contributed to the specification. But I think its openness is actually one of its strengths, because as you said, Chris, that once you're in the business of auditing people, that takes time and it takes money. And there's obviously there is a happy medium with these things, but at the point where you're charging people money, then you're putting a gate in the way, aren't you? Which doesn't mean there can't remain an open version of the standard, but it's I'd be very interested to see how that evolves, because it's not an easy question to answer, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think the mapping exercise has highlighted that there are a lot of overlaps between ISO 27001, Digital Economy Act, the NHS Data Security and Protection Toolkit,
yes.
And Cyber Essentials.
Yes.
So, and with SATRE, so we don't want this to be an N+1 accreditation. I think SATRE, my view, and I think the view that the consensus is forming around this, I think, is that SATRE is a fulcrum around which how can we improve what we have into something that meets everyone's needs? Because at the moment, we don't have that in the UK. DEA is required for non-health TREs, and health TREs don't actually have a natural thing. People are kind of coalescing around ISO, but it's a information security management system. That's what it audits. It's how you manage your processes and how you manage your sensitive data. Doesn't really cover what a TRE does. So I think there's a gap here that needs to be filled, and clearly with the adoption and the interest that SATRE has generated, it's filling that. And then how do we migrate to a place where we have one good place for doing federation in an accredited manner, in a secure manner across the UK? And I think we're on that journey.
Yeah. So, Chris, Tim, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really interesting discussion around SATRE. One final question before we stop, which perhaps I should have asked at the start. If people want to find out more about SATRE, or if they have scored their TRE against it, where can they go? Where can they get that information, or where can they publicise their score?
So there are two key websites with SATRE. So there's the specification itself, which is open and accessible and free on the Read the Docs site, which I'm sure you'll share. It's quite a long URL, so I won't read it out. But also, once you've looked at it and you have evaluated yourself to it, it's really helpful to be able to demonstrate that and show to your data controllers and your stakeholders as like, look, not only do I say I'm SATRE compliant, but I also have it here, and you can look at it and you can see what other organizations in the same space are also there and doing that. So we have an evaluation website, which is currently being revamped. It's a little bit not quite perfect at the moment, but hopefully that'll be revamped very shortly at satre.uktre.org. And currently we have a real mix of 6 TREs, including yourselves, Aridhia, ourselves, an SDE, the Scottish National Safe Haven, another Scottish Regional Safe Haven, and an academic TRE from the Francis Crick Institute. So if you want to add yourselves to that, then please do, and it'd be really great to have that as a starting point for everyone to be involved.
Absolutely. Well, I think on that note, thank you very much for your time today. And we look forward to seeing how SATRE evolves in version 2, and who knows, even version 3. So thank you again.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.